Well, we're all in this lockdown business, so tier 2 or tier 3, whatever tier you happen to be in. I thought I'd just spend some time looking at grayling fishing. And this little video looks predominantly at grayling flies, particularly the more famous flies used in this part of the world on these North Country rivers. And the second video, which will come later, looks at the Great Yorkshire grayling anglers and particularly the books they published and the information which is in these books. So a little bit about grayling flies on northern rivers. Well, where do you start? There are dozens of them, each with many variations, and more appear every year. One of the problems when looking at flies in general, or of videos of flies being tied, is they are tied with southern rivers such as the Test and the Itchen, or sort of plum, midland and limestone rivers such as the Dove of the Derwent of Derbyshire in mind. I mean, that's where the money is. And they tend to be overdressed for northern rivers. The classic flies of Walbran, Pritt, Bradshaw and Sturdy et al., who fished the Yorkshire Dales rivers over 100 years ago, are still popular today. But with the advent of modern materials, many better variants are now available. I mean, purists tend to frown upon them, but I can't imagine the greats of that time turning down carbon rods or fixed spool reels or silk line in preference to nylon. They fished with the best that was available to them, and so should we. Most grayling fishing in northern rivers is with wet flies or nymphs, and traditional North Country patterns are still relevant. This is the grouse and orange. There's another variant, of course, the partridge and orange, probably a little bit more famous, which has a partridge hackle as opposed to grouse hackle. This is another early season and late season, the snipe and purple. And notice how lightly tied they are. The best book on spider patterns and how to tie them that I've come across is A Guide to North Country Flies by Mike Harding, who's better known as a comedian. Although it was only published in 2009 and cost £14.99, it's now more than 300 quid. Although rumour has it, it will be reprinted. And then the various bumble type flies, tied Palmer style, very popular on Derbyshire rivers. You'll notice on the end of the body is a little flash of silver. And then there are the what we call the blower flies, especially the waterhen blower. I mean, blower means a sort of a bluish or slate colour. Notice the very wispy fibres there protruding from the body. It really needs to be very lightly dressed. And there are many more which you can find on the web. Flies on the web. Sorry about that. Today we have a myriad of artificial materials, many as substitutes for natural fur and feathers, which would be deemed unethical today, and rightly so. Things like water vole or seal's fur, kingfisher, dotterel, or corncrake feathers. There are beads of various metals and an absolute plethora of colours to sink flies quickly. Years ago I can remember saving the lead caps from used wine bottles to tie leaded bodies. I mean, now you get lead wire. There's flashy this and sparkly that, The list is endless. Then along came the Czechoslovakians and the Poles with their short line nymph style of fishing, using very, very heavy nymphs, taking the World Fly Fishing Championships 3 years in a row by hefty margins. It's a number of years since I fly fished for grayling, and looking in my fly box from that time, these seem to predominate on 14 to 18 hooks, bead hen, gold-ribbed hare's ear. Well, that one seems to have rather more tail than mine, and a slight red collar to it. And these featured prominently as well. Pheasant-tailed nymph, and that's the original, which is a far cry from today's variant with a big gold bead and thick copper wire rib. And this was Frank Sawyer's killer bug. He was a river keeper on one of the southern chalk streams where graylings were regarded as vermin. So this was designed to remove grayling from the River Avon. That's a Wiltshire Avon, I think, or Dorset, Wiltshire I think it is, where they were regarded as vermin. Sawyer said it looked like a shrimp, but others thought it looked like a maggot. Heaven forbid. His swore its success was because of the colour of the wool. It was a darning wool for men's socks, Chadwick's 447. I mean, it hasn't been made for decades, about 50 years, and more of this stuff has been sold than was ever produced. It's still appearing on websites at astronomical prices. I mean, I saw a figure of £55 for a metre. I mean, that's just unbelievable. But it's very rarely the genuine article. There'll be someone somewhere turning out Chadwick cards with Chadwick 447 stamped on it and some brown wool wrapped round. But, I mean, how would you know? You wouldn't have a clue. I mean, anglers have been looking for a substitute for this 447 for years. And this Barocco Ultra Alpaca Fine is, I think it's an American wool, but I mean, even finding that is nigh on impossible. And it's the fine wool you want, not just the Ultra Alpaca. And closer to home, Jamieson's of Lerwick in Shetland, they have a spindrift wool in oyster, which is another substitute. I mean, it works well, and it's still freely available on the internet. I had very little success with a killer bug, but I think it looks like a maggot, which was very controversial. And it may fare better in water where maggots are used. I rarely fish for grayling with a dry fly, but there were often times when they were sipping tiny flies from the surface film to the exclusion of everything else. It was absolutely infuriating. Obviously, things like aphids. And I had moderate success, that's probably an exaggeration, with a tiny grey duster, or Griffith's gnat, or a minute black fly tied on a size 20, which is about all my eyes could stand. A fine wired partridge hook, fished with a 1 pound point. And there's a nice tying of a grey duster, very lightly tied, northern style, north country style. And this is a later, more so-called modern version of parachute fly. But again, it strikes me as being heavily dressed, particularly at the tail. There's an excellent article by Dave Southall, or Southall, in volume 27, number 10, the spring and summer of the Journal of the Grayling Society, on overcoming the problems of grayling feeding on aphids. I mean, he ties really tiny flies, right down to size 30, with sort of little bits of a fluffy feather on. But it's a good read. I mean, one of the most long-standing grayling fly is the red tag and all the variations of it. I mean, a red tag can be tied to most grayling wet flies, and a flash of silver is also a great attractant. The original red tag had a brown hackle and was tied with black thread, but I prefer this variant. It's got a much lighter hackle, but it could be a partridge hackle, that. And one thing you notice about many grayling flies is peacock veil plays a large part in these. And this is one tied palmer hackle, looks like a bumble really. It's called a Grayling witch, and again you'll notice the red tag. It doesn't want to be too long. This is a fly called the priest, and it combines both red tag and silver body. And I found it worked really well in turbid water. Obviously reflects the light. And this lightweight variant tied by Davy McPhail is probably the best tying for northern rivers. And shrimps in various hues are one of the most popular flies used in shortline fishing today, particularly this pink one. I mean, there isn't a natural shrimp that colour in the river. It makes you wonder what grayling think it is. But it also works well in orange. And beadheads are all the rage now. This is a check nymph. It's a red tag. Red tags everywhere. There's a mountain of information on the internet. You just have to find your own way through it. I mean, like the fishing itself, there's much pleasure in tying your own flies, and the exhilaration on catching a fish out of one of your own ragged creations, well, it's just something else. One of the best articles I've seen on fly fishing for grayling came from the December 2009 edition of The Field magazine. And if you're into these things, it's well worth reading. And this link should find it. It's very good. So this next little bit deals with strike indicators. One of the methods mentioned in the article above, the little field article, uses a strike indicator. As their name suggests, these are brightly coloured, sort of buoyant materials attached to the leader to indicate a fish's interest. For the purist fly fisherman, this is a controversial issue. Essentially, it's float fishing with nymphs. And it's been around for years. People think it's a relatively recent thing, but it goes all the way back to The Complete Angler, which was published in 1676. Corks, sliding quills, and more recently large bushy flies, they were all used. Some had a small white duck feather attached to the cork. I mean, there were no opticians then. You couldn't go to Specsavers. The leader usually carried two nymphs or wet flies, one on the point and another on a dropper. The position of the indicator depended on the depth of the swim. I mean, more recently, small adhesive foam pads have been made available to attach to the leader, and they're sort of folded over the line. There you are, you can see them there. But they're quite hard to find. I mean, especially in the colour you want. I mean, everywhere I've looked, most of them seem to be out of stock. The problem comes when you move swims. there's a change of depth in the next swim, when a new indicator has to be placed in a different place on the leader. And this is overcome by a method I came across on IB and Andy's YouTube vlog. And there's the link. Well, you probably have to cut and paste that, or type it in. In this, the foam strike indicator is held in place by float stops and can be moved up and down the leader depending on the depth of the swim. You can buy a multicoloured sponge on the internet, things like pan scourers, and you can make your own indicators to suit your eyesight and the weight of the nymphs on the leader. And this little video demonstrates how to do that. Strike indicators are quite hard to get hold of. The only ones seemingly at the moment are yellow, which is not what I want. So you can make your own. All you need is some foam, and you can buy this. It's 2mm thick foam in multicolours. And the pink and red, or the pink and the orange, are much easier to see it at a distance if you're long trotting. Well, you can buy these just pan washers, wash-ups, and they come in. These come in different colours as well, in a little pack. And you just cut it with a craft knife. Anyway, I'll set about making one of these strike indicators, see how we get on. Because this foam isn't terribly thick, I'm going to make a double thickness. So I need 2 pieces of orange and 2 pieces of sort of pink. And a long hook, I think it's a size 12. So I need to stick the 2 orange pieces together and the 2 pink pieces together. So I've just stuck them together with some Stick impact glue. So the next thing is to bury that hook point in this foam so that the eye is just protruding to the outside. There we are. Now to stick the orange and pink together with a hook in the middle. So there's the pink and orange sandwich, and you can just see the eye of the hook sticking out of the side. I mean, I'll cut this plastic foam to shape later on. I mean, this is just for the purposes of making the thing. It's far too big. And of course, the glue has to be waterproof. Well, how does it work? Well, you need some of these things. These little rubber things are called float stops. And you need them in the smallest size for fine lines. So for those of you not familiar with these things, in order to get them on the line, you thread your leader or your line through that hole there. And then double it over, and then you pull the float stop up the wire onto the leader, demonstrate. So you pull the float stop up to there and then pull really hard. See it sliding on there, and you just pull it past this end. There. So there is the float stop on the line. Now you need to thread on your strike indicator. So you put the line through the eye of the hook, and then add another float stop. So now you've got a float stop top and bottom of your strike indicator, which is freely moving on the line through the eye of the hook, and you can move it up and down the line and set it at whatever depth you want. All that's needed now is to trim this this foam block. So there's the finished article. I should have trimmed it before before I put it on the line with the stops. Doesn't matter. But you can see that a mile away, and you can make it as big or small as you like. What I'm going to do with all the rest of this foam, I have no idea. It'd be enough to make a strike indicator for everybody in Yorkshire. I think that would work really well for long trotting. In his 1996 book, Trout Fishing Techniques, John Goddard says that buoyant strike indicators are banned in New Zealand. But he mentions another of their very successful techniques, the dropper nymph. A large, heavy nymph is attached to the leader tippet, and a tiny hair and copper nymph, think copper-ribbed hare's ear, that's what it looks like, is attached to the bend of the heavier nymph on a short length of bono. And this is a drawing from his book. And some European, UK anglers are using this as a way of getting small flies down to deeply lying grayling in the winter, using the short line or check nymphing method. Oh, interesting. I've never seen anyone using it, but I've never heard of it before. And then finally, just a little bit about droppers. There's much mention of droppers in fly fishing. For those new to fly fishing, these are short lengths of line attached to the main leader, so that more than one wet fly or nymph can be fished at the same time. You can buy leaders with droppers attached, but they are easy to tie on the leader yourself when you want them. And this next short piece of video shows you how to do it, although when you're trying to do it with two pieces of thick mono leaning over a camera, it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be. But anyway, you just have to make the best of these things. This is the main leader. On the end is the point fly, and then this thing comes off the side with a fly on. And this bit is called a dropper. And usually there are two of these, but you can't just have one. But it's a useful skill to know how to tie one of these on. You can buy leaders with droppers already attached, but the spacing might not be right for what you want, so it might be better just to have a plain leader and attach your own droppers, and I'll just demonstrate how to do that. I'll use some much thicker mono so you can see it. So there are the two pieces. The darker green is the main leader and the white is the dropper. You just make a loop like that, take it underneath, and pull it through. And pull it through a second time. Just like that. And pull it tight. And clip off the bit you don't want. Just clip that off. So there's the dropper attached. But to make it stand out from the leader rather than point downwards, just put a second loop in. And just bring the end of the dropper up through the loop. Just leader out of the way. And pull it tight. You see the dropper sticks out at right angles. It looks a lot better on thinner mono. This is £25. Anyway, you get the gist. It's a question of caring for grayling. The use of barbless hooks by many anglers is also to be welcomed, as is not putting them in keep nets. I mean, putting them in keep nets is a definite no-no. And if you're using barbless hooks, you just have to accept that you aren't going to catch as many grayling, because they're very, very good at getting off the hook. I mean, 2 pound grayling are rarely caught on Yorkshire rivers today. Grayling are the delicate jewels in our northern rivers and streams, and we should treat them as such. Well, there's mountains of stuff on the internet about tying knots and everything to do with fishing. Most of them involve soft string and thick. But when it comes to tying it with the actual mono, it's far more difficult, especially when you try to tie from behind a camera. And strike indicators, well, I mean, choose your own colour, choose your own size. I suppose it depends on how good your eyes are. Anyway, I'll just add my 10 pence to all the videos on YouTube. Make of it what you like. But for now, I'll see you again. Take care. Bye bye.